Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to have a really unique opportunity to go back in history and focus on a very special group at a very special time in American history, the Tuskegee Airmen. But first, let me introduce you to my guests as they are right now. John McCaskill, who is a performer and historian and really brings history alive, to use your name. For students, for adults, for all kinds of groups. And Claude Vann III, who is partially responsible for bringing John in, at least this time around. I'm going to start with you, John. What is it you're going to portray? You're going to show us later a little bit how you portray one of the Tuskegee Airmen. What is it that is different about telling someone what happened and showing someone?
Well, first let me say I'm delighted to be here, Ms. Robin. Thank you for having me. You know, I think as kids, we learn through storytelling. And I think it can be more exciting to teach history when you can cause a person to feel as if they're there, to be able to tell the story. It evokes so many other emotions in people. And I think there's a benefit to that. And so what I try to do is I try to do living history, different periods, and to pretty much tell the story of history to get people involved. Otherwise, you know, just doing dates and places, a lot of people just, they're not engaged.
Right, right. So my complaint is that a lot of times history is shaped by the battles, and obviously wars and the outcome are who we are today. I mean, if they'd turned out differently, we wouldn't be here, or we would be very, very different. But to memorize the details of those, to me, is very boring. But when you see the people and their motivations and how they acted, I mean, that brings history alive to me. Oh, I'm using your term again, because that's what you do.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Claude, what is it about, you're in a local group that honors the Tuskegee Airmen? Or?
Right. I'm a member of the Tidewater chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. We're one of 55 chapters throughout the United States and Europe that want to continue the legacy of the brave men and women that were part of the Tuskegee Airmen group. Certainly, John has done a phenomenal job. He was with us in Veterans Day and just did a super job. We wanted to get him back here because even though I have been associated with the Tuskegee Airmen for years, I learned something that day also. So he does a wonderful job. But we want to perpetuate the history of these brave men who dared to go up and prove how good they were and how they wanted to fight for the right to fight for their country.
Now, you have an Army background.
Absolutely. And as I always inform my Air Force contemporary, the Tuskegee Airmen was born out of the Army Air Corps.
Well, I was going to say back then it was Army Air Corps. It was before
the Air
this.
Force had not
okay,
been
so you have a
established.
link then.
Absolutely.
But
and,
it's also a link to military history, and when, you know, that kind of first African American Corps came about in the military, it led the way for other branches. And as we now know, there were other branches who maybe are less well known now and less celebrated. But certainly there was a Marine group, I forget what they're called.
Montford Point Marines.
Yes, that we're just now really learning about on a broad basis.
Absolutely. But I feel that I have a tie to the Air Force because my dad was in for 28 years, 6 months and 10 days. He always let me know how long.
Is that longer than yours?
Yes.
Yeah, no wonder he kept reminding you.
Absolutely. But great organization, the Air Force, as well as the Tuskegee Airmen, but certainly history is a great part of us telling our story.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we've had a Tuskegee Airman here on the show, but really there aren't a whole lot left. I mean, it's that whole World War II generation, and who's going to keep telling their story when they're not here to do it?
And that's going to fall on to guys like myself. You probably had Chief Master Sergeant retired Grant Williams, who appeared before, and just last year we lost him. And so certainly they're not going to be around forever. None of us will, but certainly somebody wants to carry the story, and I'm one of the guys who wants to do that.
That's great. Well, John, how did you get into this? What was your motivation?
Well, let me just say that, history has been my passion since 8 years old.
Really?
My report cards used to come home, John's a good student, he just talks too much. But when history was being taught, I was quiet. And long story short, I was majoring in something else. Went to the dean of history, and I said, "You mean to tell me these books that I'm carrying for fun I can get credit for?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Well, sign me up." And so that was the beginning of it.
What were you majoring in?
Oh, at the time, I think I was doing music at the time.
Oh, I see. I was going to guess you were doing like business or something where you could have a career, because history is a hard career to make money in. So's music.
It could be. Yeah, you're right. It could be. But the value of history is it doesn't matter what subject you end up going into. There's a history to it.
Yes.
Journalism students. Guess what? There's a history to journalism. So I was into these stories. I did Park Service, which allowed us to do living history.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we could
They're
dress
very
in
good
period
at
of
that.
time.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating to be able to put on the attire of a period and then assimilate it and pretty much go back to that period and try to bring others back with you. So that's how I got started in it, and it just continued and continued, and there's an audience for it. And so people will say, "Hey, can you come and do this for us? Can you come and talk about such and such?" So it's fascinating. I have to use all of my previous education and history to research something I may only have 3 weeks to get prepared for. But it's a thrill. It's a thrill to be able to do it. So
what other characters or periods do you do?
I do colonial. I do quite a bit of Civil War, and I am also starting to do more civil rights movement, 1960s.
We're ready to
period.
get back, and for a while I think there was a little bit of a shutdown, and now maybe people are willing to go back and look at that time again.
I think so. When you're in a particular period, sometimes it can be painful.
Mm-hmm.
But 40, 50 years later, looking back on that moment, just by the way of passing, Dr. King came out against the Vietnam War. A lot of people at that point said, "Oh, you're wrong. We can't go along with this." But we look back 50 years later and see that a lot of what he said was not only applicable then, it's applicable now. And I think that we need to revisit those things and say, okay, what from this can we actually take away with? And I think people are ready for that. We wouldn't have had a Dr. King memorial 20 years ago, but now is the time for it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exciting. What are the reactions you get from your audience when you're in character?
Oh my goodness. And it's not comfortable for me to say this, right? But people want to shake my hand. People are like, "Oh, wow, I was thinking about doing this, and now you've inspired me to do it." My goal is, whether it's middle school students or retirees and everybody in between, to inspire people to do better and to be better. Looking at history, looking at ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and having people to say to me, "You know what? My dream has been to do this. I think I can do this." Or, "I want to do better. I think I'm going to do better." I can't explain. Even today, I'm still surprised when people come up and say, "Wow, you did a great job, man." You know
Really?
what? Oh my goodness, yes. And particularly if you're talking about World War II, to have people who were there and say, "Son, your story's accurate. Thank you for telling the story." It's so rewarding. And here's my thing. I tell people I may not be in Congress at this stage of my life. I may not be in a Pro Football Hall of Fame or the next great doctor, but I will influence the lives of those who will go on to do those things. And I think that if I'm able to do that, and some little kid turns out to be the next Supreme Court justice, then I think I've probably done my job.
I would say so. Inspiring particularly young people, but also inspiring people, here's Claude, he's retired from his day job and he's still kind of working almost full time, doing volunteer things and other commitments. And, we're never too old to get re-inspired. Not that you're old, you're probably my age, but, and I like to think that I'm not that old. But, where you can change, where you can do new things, where you can be inspired, no matter what your age is.
Well, I'm looking forward to his B.O. Davis Jr. because I had the opportunity to meet him when he came to Hampton in 1992 at the Air and Space Museum.
Oh, wow.
And he had just finished writing his book, autobiography, and I got his autograph and got to take pictures with him. And oftentimes, as John, and I've watched him, people come up, want to take pictures with him and whatnot. And I was like that when I met General Davis. And I just feel that I have touched history. And as you indicated, I'm getting a little old, I'm a little gray around the temples. But the longer I live, the more I feel a part of history. And maybe because I'm ancient in the eyes of some of the grade school kids in middle school. It's like, God, that guy is old. He's seen
we
a whole
are,
lot.
aren't we? Yeah.
But certainly history is, the more I live, the more I enjoy history.
Well, I think, you know, we all do when it's told right. It can't be pushing facts and numbers into someone's brain to pass a test. It has to be understanding why things happened and how people lived and how our lives changed to where they are today and to where they're going to be in the future. Because whatever we're doing today is going to be history at some point. So.
That's for sure.
And you're going to bring all that alive to us.
Yes.
And the character you're going to be is Benjamin Davis, who is in World War II and is a, what rank at this time?
When he went to Tuskegee for flight training, he was a captain, and by the time they get to Europe, he's a colonel.
Okay.
He's a colonel. So.
And you actually met him.
I actually met him.
So we're going to
his
see how much he reminds you and how real it feels to you. And so we're going to, I'm so excited to see this. I'm going to quit asking questions and quit talking, and we're going to break. And when we come back, you're going to be in character, and we're going to be off to the side watching, and you're going to make history come alive.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be right back.
So the 99th had just arrived in Europe. Right around that time, I got notification that I was to take command of the 332nd Fighter Group, which was still stateside. I went back stateside, and once I got there, I also realized there was a letter that had been written about the 99th that essentially said that we were not performing up to standards. Well, I was a little upset with that. No one ever said anything to me about it. I had to go back and pretty much testify for the squadron. A lot of higher-ups at that point said, hey, you know what, maybe we just need to disband. We'll make the 99th part of coastal duty along with the 332nd, and the 477th, which was a bomber group that was being trained, we'll just disband them. Well, it was unfair. No one had really talked about this whole issue. And so they had an investigation. And what the investigation revealed was that we were actually doing a good job in the theater. The men felt good about that. We felt like we were a part of this war effort, and we were helping to win this war. Shortly after that, General Ira Aker called me. He says, listen, we're sustaining heavy losses in our strategic bombing plan. As a matter of fact, I think that February we had lost 114 bombers. His idea was for us to fly escort. Well, I jumped on it. And I told the men, I said, look, we have an opportunity to prove who we really are. I told these men, I said, men, you will sacrifice your lives for these bombers. 1 crewman versus 10. If you have to make that sacrifice, you will. And so we flew, and we protected those bombers. And after a while, we started to get telephone calls and letters from other squadron members, navigators, bombardiers, pilots, thanking us. If we saw a bomber that was straggling, we would dispatch a couple of our planes to escort it into safe territory. We continued to fly, and pretty soon, not long after that, the war ended. Some of my pilots I wasn't going to see anymore. I wrote them goodbye letters and thanked them for their service. About 15 of my officers and about 25 enlisted men were going back to take over the 477th. This war was only half won, but we had contributed and proven that we were assets to the nation. Well, they were. Those guys did a tremendous job. Those guys opened the doors for a whole lot of other people years later. General Davis, Tuskegee Airmen, so many others were individuals who had the fortitude to believe in the notion as to what this country can potentially be at its very best. They heard those same 18th century words which were penned. Those words still echo clearly today. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was because of the sacrifices of so many that we are the nation that we are today. I know we're not perfect. You can pick up the newspaper and find out we still have a lot of work to do. But we want to say to those individuals, past, present, and future, that we thank you for your service, your sacrifice, your courage, your honor. We appreciate what you did, and our hats are off to you.